Patrick McAndrew, I think, is one of the many people in this community who are very interesting in that they have a very varied background. And I think that's one of the things that makes the group of people out there very interesting. You never know what you're going to find in people's closets or backgrounds there. So Patrick's a maths graduate, he's got a PhD in computer vision, he's worked for British Gas, Marconi Avionics, and now he's a professor of open education at Open University, which is not the kind of career path you might have planned as you sit in school there filling out your UCAS application. So I think, as I understand, Patrick is the first chair anywhere of open education, which I think is a significant achievement. I first met Patrick probably about 10 years ago now during a European project called Guardians, which was looking at a range of things, and one of which was the use of integrated digital televisions as a medium with which you would interact with students. Maybe 10 years has gone and we didn't realise that vision now. Maybe television is becoming more interesting again and we can start to think about its role within open education perhaps. So when I met Patrick again very recently at Open University, the first thing he said to me with a bit of a smile was, are you still doing that boring standard stuff? I had to admit the answer was yes. Well, I'm pretty confident that Patrick is not doing the same boring stuff and probably never has done, so I'd now like to hand over to Patrick to share with us some of what he's been doing since I last met him.
So thanks very much. Really great to be here, and also I think it's a very interesting timing as well, because we are part of Open Education Week there, and it's good that we've managed to tie up, and maybe we've got some audience out there who are coming to us through Open Education Week as well. The title I've given to this is The Path to Open Learning is Paved with Good Intentions. It's actually the second title I came up with, because the original title was The Path to MOOCs is paved with good intentions. And, you know, there's generally another word that goes in that bit there. You know, and yes, I thought of you, Tori, when I found this picture. So, but to go back to my title, it's open learning. Now, actually, we're trying to get somewhere good, and we shouldn't feel we're going somewhere bad. And I do want to sort of be optimistic here. I mean, be happy is where I'm going to end up with. So there's a lot of good things we're doing, and we've got a lot of good ideas, and we are going very good places. Just before I leave this slide, just to mention that I'm also here sort of, as well as representing Open University, I'm an affiliate with the CC UK. So I had to make up a logo for the CC UK last night when I realised they hadn't got one, so I'll offer that back to them as an option. So Creative Commons has been one of the drivers behind the move to openness, and I think the right way to be open is part of the message I want to give, and whether that matters as well. Okay, so having passed through hell, we're at CETIS. And I've been listening to what we've been saying, so I want to sort of bring back some of the reflections that come from my path through this conference, which won't be the same as everybody's. Very interesting run through the sessions that I wasn't able to go to. But I feel like I've been behaving a bit like somebody with these Google Glass devices, sort of looking around and recording things as I go along. So we started with Paul, and he was highly disruptive to my talk by banning the buzzwords. So, damn, I said I wouldn't say that one. He also brought me back to the beginning of this and talked about the 10 years of CETIS, and I realised I actually go a little bit back further than that. Because I remember 13 years ago when I worked at Heriot-Watt University, I actually wrote a proposal that didn't get funded for the UK RMS, and that became CETIS later on. 15 years ago, Bill. Wow. Yeah. So it has really changed things, this area of work, from being what was rather obscure, sort of recognising that there's a right way to do things, there's a way in which we can work together, there's an international activity that we really need to know about, to being this sort of go-to organisation. And I share, and as part of the session with Scott just then, you know, do carry on. Even if it is as zombies, then do have a life. Josie gave the first keynote, and I've got my mobile phone here, which I want to use later on, but it keeps going buzz as people tweet about me. So she started actually with a phrase, which, let me get this right. It was, some people may even have children in this room. Oh yeah, that happened on a train a few days ago, didn't it? So maybe it's going to be really exciting. But if I turn it around, I think she meant some people in this room may even have children. And yeah, I'm one of those. I've got an 18-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. And it's really interesting sort of watching their engagement with this world. And was it Wilbert? Was it you who said media wisdom? Yeah, as the European phrase, or a translation of a European phrase. Because I think there is this challenge of digital literacy as a baseline, a point we must meet, and there's something really exciting going on as well. Media wisdom or media engagement, just using these tools. So my son's had an article that appeared in a radical newsletter in the US, and those sort of things that is quite amazing. And running a nation for nearly 5 years now online, there's all these things that people can do, and this also reflects another thing that Josie said, which is that your children can do more than you can do. So my children can do these things. I'm not sure I can do them. The other bit we got to though was should the internet forget? I think that's really interesting, because as I get older, I forget, and I'm beginning to rely on the internet as my backup. And if it sort of had this fall off, it'd be really interesting, but or really challenging. So I'm not sure the internet should forget, and I'll come back to another reason why that matters to me. Must keep going. So in the session on openness, where one person who will remain nameless, because that was a requirement of listening to her, or him, just to keep anonymity protected there, said no tweets, but we really need to share with ourselves, and sometimes that means that we don't share with the whole world. But you've already seen perhaps summary of projects as seesaws, and it became parallel seesaws, so we're leaping from seesaw to seesaw and running different projects. But actually, I think it's a really interesting point that we've got to, where we're starting to do this anyway, because it matters to the organisations we work with. It matters to us to become involved in all of the work here. So are people really doing things because we're project-driven? Maybe actually some of the lack of opportunity in funding styles, not trying to pretend it's good, but it might help us see that the work we're doing is important to others than those who ask for us to do purely innovative projects. So that's a sort of route to sustainability. There's other things, sort of the rewards of being an open academic commons and sort of pragmatic approaches to open. All right. The last session I was in this morning was, am I writing the right one? Yes. Was the open innovation strand that Scott's referred to, and I thought, again, that was really interesting, in the same sort of story of sort of things that are carrying forward, connections being made. If we don't see ourselves as transferring things, maybe we shouldn't sustain ourselves, we should make sure other people get involved in this increasingly open world. So I went to the open innovation section, but a bit of my heart was also in the learning analytics area, because I think that's a really fascinating area. Just because I say, Adam mentioned sort of my history, and so I've probably got a shared history as well as my unique one of sort of learning objects, learning design, and e-learning, e-frameworks, all these things, and open education resources. So there's a sort of group of interesting people. They're all interested in learning analytics now, and I'm feeling slightly left behind. So, but I was able to track learning analytics due to Sheila in particular, Lorna, And I went off briefly and found a thing that drew me this diagram. This is a visualization of the tweets from the hashtag CETIS13. I think of this really as a Sheila tracker, probably as much as anything else. So we can see that she was talking about OER stuff yesterday, and today she's been talking about data stuff. And but it was interesting to sort of see the connection made, and that's what had been described. Okay, so coming back to the internet and its memory. So a brick in a wall. So I did a quick search, and I found a presentation from me in 2004, which I looked at and thought, I can't really remember this. But anyway, it was on learning design in 2004 at Heriot-Watt University when we had a CETIS conference there, and it was actually my take on the match between learning design and the brick in the wall picture. There's the brick in the wall. Internet remembered it better than I did by a long way. But we've just received, it's on your chairs for the people in the room, the MOOCs and Open Education Implications for Higher Education white paper from Liwan and Stephen Fowle. And I think this sort of shows the continuing impact, the continuing being at the leading edge of the work of CETIS and this area. So sort of constantly being there at what's interesting in the world, letting people know, giving a proper view of things, not just going with the buzzword, but properly using the buzzwords to attract people. I'm glad you didn't ban MOOCs, actually, as the word that we could use. You probably didn't think to ban MOOCs, you will do now. It also took me back, and this got to mention, I think, the Open Ed 2012, so it's much more recent, and you can find a YouTube and watch an interesting talk by Gardner Campbell. But he was talking about where we are today, and he had this lovely refrain of, this is not what we meant, as you sort of see things, oh, this MOOC, it's nothing like we actually meant when we're working this. And I don't entirely agree with this, because I think there's room for lots of different ways in which we work, and the evolution process that's going on in the MOOCs and the diversity of it is growing as time passes. So I don't really want to end up with this slightly negative view of progress, and I think we've gone somewhere really interesting. So I'll now get back to what was my talk before I got distracted by the conference, and the good intentions. For those people who like these sort of things, I've taken a sort of list approach, and there's sort of different approaches. So I'm going to list various good intentions, but I kept thinking of more and more and more of them, so I stopped after a bit. So, good intention. So, to build on what we know. So, all of these are good intentions. We try and do them. It doesn't mean we always do them. And do we actually remember our history? Well, I've just shown you that I think CETIS is part of that history collection, and the buried treasure that's there is part of what we should use. But then when something like this did happen, so it did feel sort of, oh, yes, nobody's ever thought of that before. Putting courses online, that's an interesting idea. And I think good thing, learning very quickly, being exposed in this way, great to be out there. The bad thing, sort of, why do you do some of these things? And please sort of do pay attention to things that are known. And I think the community needs to come together around this. They do some things that they know. So the interesting thing of certification, so this is my own partial history in MOOC land. I've got a certificate of completion from Google for allowing them to market me with their latest search features. And I've got one that I'm relatively proud of from MITx for doing some difficult maths, which I found quite amusing, but sort of not exactly sort of frontline stuff. It was it's very nice to do, and I'm not knocking it. But it was also sort of made me realise that, okay, so for somebody who's got a maths degree and a doctorate and now professor, very pleased by that, but, you know, and I've also got an MIT X certificate as well. But it's sort of, who's the market in this? And it was very difficult stuff, very challenging. It felt very like the filter approach to education that MIT and other organisations, in fact the whole university sector to a certain extent, represents the filtering of people who can't do this get left behind. And if you get through to the other side, we celebrate you. And so it sort of comes all the way through to a small group of people who've survived. So, and it's sort of, the worry to me is sort of what happens to those people who we're trying to bring in. And this isn't really what openness is about now. I'm not going down Gardner's route too much of sort of this is not what we meant, but I think it's only part of what we mean. We mean a way in which we can actually bring people forward. If we're going to live by the ideals that we set ourselves of really trying to improve the engagement of learning more broadly, then this can only be part of the answer, not filtering. So it does bring me back to you and innovating pedagogy work and some of the things that we found ourselves in open learning. And this sort of ties up. So it ties up. So we got some lessons that perhaps didn't act on as well as ones we did act on. So I think actually the structuring of things into a takeable unit with more definite outcomes is quite a good approach. And we perhaps need to do more of that in our future use of open education resources, not just see it as providing the world with piles of things, but seeing it as providing people with proper learning outcomes. But does completion equal success? So this is from a PhD student in IET at the Open University, which has an interesting story itself, because this was an exercise that she did on a MOOC. So the MOOC asked her to carry out a visualization exercise, doing the infographics one. And so this wouldn't exist if she wasn't on a MOOC. It's not really her PhD. It's the sort of side effect. So it's visualization of the number of people who enrolled along the bottom axis and the percentage of people who completed, ranging from, I think the bottom one's something like 0.7 and up to about 19%. But there's a sort of so what about this, because it's what do people value as you go through, and how can we build experiences that everybody who takes part can find a value in. Don't need to get to an end point. If it's a filter, if it's getting that certificate, if it's being part of the model of education as is, then it matters. But if it's giving value to people, then it doesn't. I might say a bit more about that later. So, moving on to another good intention. Innovation. That we seek to innovate. Session open innovation. This is a picture I took in Pittsburgh a while back, and I've used it before. It's sort of, there's innovation where we just paint the dinosaur. Okay, it's a bit prettier, and it might fool a few people, but it's still a dinosaur. And so, how do we properly innovate? Well, this is where I go into the slightly more dangerous territory, I think, because first I'll talk briefly about the experiment that failed. So the people have been very down on a Coursera course, which was called off. But I think people must be allowed to fail in this. Otherwise, you won't experiment. So I think lessons needed to be learned from whoever was running this course, but to actually sort of feel like they failed because they tried is very wrong. So we mustn't sort of build in too many expectations of what it means for success in us as well. And this is where I mentioned FutureLearn, and apparently Simon also mentioned FutureLearn earlier. So I don't know how dangerous it is for somebody from the Open University to mention FutureLearn, but I'm going to find out now. So we're doing various things to innovate. So we are taking part in this world, and we're reorganising things. And indeed, as part of FutureLearn presentation, Martin gives us these sort of 8 lessons for innovators. So if you want to innovate, here's a set of advice from Martin Bean, who I've got a huge amount of respect for. Martin is, of course, our Vice-Chancellor at the Open University. But we're also doing sort of smaller things. So we've been running the learning design for the 21st century curriculum, or old MOOC as we call it. What's that stand for? Open Learning Design Studio, and I know some people in this room have been partaking of that, and it's been really quite an experiment for us as well, sort of very, very challenging. We've brought together 10 plus experts in learning design, and we've run it in a very connected way. It's brought back some of the scariness of face-to-face teaching for us who operate at distance. But we also drawn on lessons of sort of putting in quality checks and so forth. So it's an interesting area to work. It's an interesting area to innovate. Innovating in the open, doing this sort of thing in the open drives you along. This is a challenge really to anybody else. So I've said that part of what I'm learning at the moment, and I know from others in the room, is taking part as well as a learner. So there's a challenge for us, a constant challenge of people who are working on the producer side, the educator side, is how do our experiences match with a learner? Well, you can go out there and try, and it's part of helping it innovate. So a new MOOC starts on Friday, actually. Martin Weller, my colleague, is running an interesting one, which is a hybrid. So there'll be some students who are taking our MSc course, or master's level course rather, in parallel with whoever else wants to join in for this particular chunk of the course. And if you look for H817 Open, then you'll be able to track down this MOOC and sign up. And the content is all open. The content of the previous one is all open, which is not necessarily true for everything. And Martin is entirely responsible for the implied threat to the puppy that is involved in this picture, if you go there. Okay, so be accessible. So we talk, there's this image of sort of letting people in, of a walled garden where people can play. And there's this one, which is a brick wall that you hit your head against. And the barriers that sometimes we build in setting up our systems, barriers to people with disabilities, but also barriers to people with the capabilities to do something that they're very interested to do, but we assume they can do it already. And barriers of lack of openness. A disappointing side effect of the latest content that's been released through the MOOCs is, in general, you can't see it until you take it. You can't. So I don't think that started as anything sinister, but it is part of sort of the control model that's still there in a general approach to education. And this Time magazine article fairly early on spotted this, that we've got things that work for those who are self-motivated and already fairly well-educated. Whereas we know that just the previous generation, the open education resource approach of making lots and lots of things available, not mandating what people should do with them, led to all sorts of interesting things. So this is a very local example, I think. It was somebody I worked with, Andrea Santos, went to a conference in Africa, and she went around a local school which was working with a project in Cambridge, but they were changing the way they taught because they could get interesting educational materials onto the netbooks that they'd also been donated through another project. And things were actually changing practice in really quite a surprising way. And if you work in looking around the world, you keep coming across interesting things happening. And as I say, disabled use, Terry's in the room, I think, still from Texas, and or HEA now, Terry, and actually the constant. If you care about what people who've got access problems face, then you improve things for everyone. That is the whole sort of underlying sort of ethos that we found true again and again. Okay, another good intention is to be interactive. So I'm going to be interactive. So I've been talking for 20 minutes. There is research that shows that if you talk for more than 20 minutes, people lose attention. They start to yawn. They are desperately finishing that email on their laptop. So I realise there's an external audience to this as well, so it doesn't work well for you, but you can sort of catch up and Google things that we've been talking about. So if you just sort of get into huddles of about 2-3 people and talk to each other about what is your next step? What are you going to go away from this conference and try and do with the things that have come here? What's the highlight for you? Okay, I'm just going to stop talking for 3 minutes while you do that. Oh, no, sorry. So that probably seemed like a pretty short time to you. And it seemed like a very long time to me, actually, watching you all here. But it's sort of part of what we really need to do when we're designing is think about the tasks that people do. And actually, it's not about push. It's about giving people things that they do. And I don't know whether this was a good thing to try and fit into such a short time, but I hope it was. And I hope you've got some thoughts that you can come back to later. So I'm just going to push on with my good intentions. And a good intention is make use of data and learning analytics. But it's also sort of be careful what you measure is the secondary element in that. I know it came up in the session because I was following, I read some of the tweets and about is satisfaction what we measure? Is that the right thing? And it's an interesting challenge for us at the Open University where we have used that as a primary measure up to now, the happiness of our students, essentially satisfaction. But in the new regime where we are also having to take people through a loan system, we have to sort of really think, is that going to be what really matters to our students? So we've got to be very careful what we measure, because as soon as you start measuring things, you start changing behaviours as well. And so as we can see, the rapid evolution of people like Zero who've got a very good handle on their data, but are they measuring the right things? I came up with another thing earlier where I'm getting very fed up with practically all social networks these days as their behaviour converges on what they measure as important. And that what they measure as important is trapping you in there. So they send me emails saying, come back, come back. And, it's what, to me, previously social networks were a place, Twitter, etc., were a place where you could go when you wanted to engage. And now they're constantly trying to draw your attention. And it's because they all have a sort of overlying advertising model of trying to get you to do other things. So you're constantly being drawn into the wrong thing. And it's very important we don't end up that we have a system which measures a behaviour that's not relevant to the person who's learning, that is relevant to something else. But I'm not the expert in learning analytics, but we want an extra one. We've got some experts on learning analytics in this room, Simon, at the OU, but we've got so I just want to sort of drop an advert into this. We're after a professor of learning. So Yeah, yes, I hadn't quite made the connection. Yes, I'm giving this whole talk really in order to deliver an advert. We've got a post available at the moment, closing date is 22nd of April, and we're really interested in getting people who think they can do this to apply. We haven't got any particular person in mind. We are interested in a hybrid interested person who's interested in institutional improvement as well as the classic requirements on a professor of being research active. So if you feel you fit the bill, if you feel you know somebody, please do consider applying. Okay, next one. Use standards. This actually also is a slide I've used before, but coming from the analytics one, and again I think it fits with a comment that was made perhaps by Martin in the previous one. What is it? I think it's 87% of data is made up. This is completely made up, but it shows what happened to us at one stage, that you're putting all our effort into sort of metadata descriptions and so forth, and forgetting that we were actually trying to do learning behind it. So standards are a challenge, but standards have also paid off. So the IMS work actually did lead into things that mattered for us. So the content that was on OpenLearn can transfer across into iTunes U because it's in XML, it's following a structured approach, it's got the right metadata, so it's discoverable in OER Commons and things. So actually, you know, standards have a purpose, Adam. Your life is not entirely wasted. The other good intention, and people are definitely forgetting this one, use the right license. It seems a bit much to sort of say, well, we're all open, but actually please do be careful with this bit. It doesn't seem to matter at the time, but actually if we really want materials to spread and grow and be shared, then unless we get this bit right, then we will end up with a legacy that's not a legacy. We'll end up with old stuff that doesn't work, and licensing matters. So at the moment, the dominant open licensing approach is Creative Commons. So to be CC or not to be CC, that's the question. And I want to try and ask you that one as well. So the version of the question I'm asking sort of is, do you think it really matters to you that you put a Creative Commons license on what you do? Or actually, do you think, Google stuff, free stuff, it'll all get there in the end, and exposing things is what really matters? So I've done this once before. Let's see how I can get it to work again. Which is, I've got an app for it. So I've got I don't know if people can see this, a little sound meter. So I'm going to sample the room. So the noise you make matters. So you've got to make noise if you think that actually you really have to apply Creative Commons licenses, and then going to ask for another noise if you think actually it's the freedom matters. So it's sort of license versus freedom, you see, and so it's not just, they both sound quite good now, doesn't it? Okay. So license, cheer for license. Okay. Cheer for freedom. Okay. Technology tells me that freedom won that. These ears are rubbish, you know. I would have got no, the technology. Perhaps. Okay. So that's interesting. So very much in the room, it is that licensing matters, and being open properly is actually part of the story. Next one, not be in it for the money. Now, this doesn't mean don't make money. Fine. But I don't think if you build rationalization about another one of Paul's banned words, but I'm going to use it in quotes, monetization, if you sort of go into it with all of that, then every time people make the wrong decisions. So they don't even do the things that actually, I think, deliver what they want. So, but it does sort of bring you into this sort of, well, what is the motivation and what are we trying to do? So we definitely 10 years ago, starting out in open work, it was save the world. And I still think that really matters, the sort of that we are doing something that could change people's lives. And I don't really know what the meaning of life is, but it could be to learn, to actually improve, to have a better life through having better thoughts, essentially. There's all sorts of other little business models that are coming in here that now at the moment sort of ones that hook you, ones that give you a chance to try, ones that provide missing pieces. So there are things that are happening that show ways in which people can generate attraction of this, and the OU itself has got a viable return on its investment in openness. But as I say, sort of something like Save the World, something altruistic is actually important, I think. Otherwise, you will make the wrong decisions. Be prepared to reuse. So I have this slide I used in 2004. So I am practicing what I preach. But actually, it's really hard to get reuse right, so I'm going to skip over that one in general. Try to answer the questions. So we're doing work funded by the William Flora Hewlett Foundation. We're doing work again, so looking at what are people doing. So we're partnering with 8 other projects, predominantly in the US, but in other interesting places. India is one of them. To look at what is the experience, what are the hypotheses that we have around this. And I'm also going to, I'm going to try and answer any questions you ask as well. So in the room, I'm going to try and answer questions. Pretty much to the end, but I just wanted to end on be happy. So I do think there's loads of reasons for optimism. There's been a great trajectory over the last 10 years. The fact that the world is waking up to the opportunities around more open approaches is good. There are all sorts of things that are happening that can improve people's lives around openness. Times are tough, but actually this is something that makes sense in that tough world, perhaps even more than anything else. So, so that's it. I do have another slide to end on for those people who like lists, because I thought people would be desperately trying to write down my list of 10 things, and so I gathered them together in one place. So if you want a list, here's a list. But I sort of stopped once I'd done far too many slides rather than stop because I couldn't think of other things. So thank you very much. I've got to go back to my try to answer the questions slide.
So if you could wait, please, the roving mic to come to you before you ask a question. That way we can capture the questions on the feed.
Thanks, Patrick. I've got a question which we were talking about when you got us to talk to each other. That I wonder if it's difficult to see where the debate is, whether the debate is between openness and closedness, or about how institutions are going to evolve in the future. But it seems to me that underpinning everything that we see happening at the moment, the drive to MOOCs, the sort of increasing sort of push towards open content, there's a latent entrepreneurialism which is being pushed on education, which seems new. Universities, if you go back in their history, they've not been expected to be out there selling themselves, and we see this in this conference. We see organisations like CETIS and MyMass and Jorum. They're all selling themselves in ways which they've never had to do. And my question is whether there's something that we can do with technology, and maybe something that's connected with openness, that takes us to an alternative to entrepreneurialism.
Okay, I think part of my answer is that openness is a good way to operate alongside that sort of entrepreneurialism. So I'm not very entrepreneurial, but I don't mind other people being so. And it brings me back to that one I said sort of about don't be in it for money, because I think if we were driven by those entrepreneurial pushes, and there is some of that going on at the moment, if we allow them to be the driver, then I don't think, I think the chances of us doing the right thing, the best thing in order to meet people's needs as humans who need to learn, essentially, goes down. So I think that if we have that as our primary route, then it's not good. On the other hand, I think part of the openness is to actually give the opportunity to those people who can see that route. So it's not, I wouldn't use it as a sort of fight against entrepreneurialism. It's to sort of live alongside and work with them. Is that answer okay for you?
I worry about entrepreneurialism. I think in terms of having spaces to think, we talk about, ways of increasing retention, ways of bringing in more students. We don't talk about how to get your students to think harder, how to think about more difficult problems. We don't talk about that. But surely that's actually, when we're in such a crisis and the world is in such a mess, those things are really important.
Yeah. And I think the open approach gives you a chance to bring that into it. I'd hold up the old MOOC as sort of an example in the end of actually giving people that space to do thinking, and the challenge it was for us as educators as well. And it'd be quite hard to have done that within the boundaries of either an entrepreneurial approach to delivering that. JISC funded it to a certain extent. It was mainly off the willingness of the people involved to be conned out of their time, really. And that was the main way it came about. And it's very hard to fit it into anything else, including sort of more conventional approaches to delivering that either in the OU convention or convention within a university. So you get this sort of opportunity for intellectual entrepreneurism, sort of that you can get sort of new models going as well as new business models. So I say so I'm kind of leaving people to do that other than myself, but seeing the chance to do exciting things alongside it.
Thank you. Terry McAndrew, CETIS13 and the HEA. Wouldn't we do better, wouldn't we be more productive in the long run if we could actually spend more time on teaching our students to do this list at the front and not expect it directly of the academic staff? Because if the academic staff have to teach these practices to their students, in effect it will become embedded in their practice, and we'll still get the added benefit of the students showing everybody how to do it the best. It moves the risk further down the chain so that we can have that allowable failure, and because it's part of the development. And I think if we move the emphasis onto student as partners doing this work, it would be quicker and we'd get quicker wins.
Yes, I completely agree with you, and I think it's happening. So actually, particularly if you don't use the word student, use the word learner, the transfer of responsibility, interest in learning through internet opportunities, through these things, is happening. I think that is a sense a threat to the institutions. That's part of it. So part of your question earlier, I think, was on sort of the driver that comes through institutions worrying about where they're going as well. So I think that's happening, and you could say that getting these sort of ways of seeing yourself embedded into the people who are becoming our open learners out there in the world is important. And it is perhaps missing at a level that would help people follow this sort of behaviour overall. Do a MOOC on this. How many people in the room are going to volunteer to be part? No, I won't go there. I'm only just recovering from the last one, which finishes today, doesn't it, Marion? Yes. But okay, you can sort of take this as an organizational structure for a MOOC, or build it into how the people see themselves as learners overall. And it is quite tricky at the moment to know quite what is the right way to behave as a learner on the internet overall, unless you tie yourself into something more structured.
With regards to the sort of future development of OERs, there seems to me a couple of things I'd like, problems on the way. One is, okay, we seem to have come to the end of our current rounds of funding. Has the pump been primed now, and will institutions now carry on off their own bat, generating these things and giving them away? And if they do, the next thing is if MOOCs and the likes of the OERU start picking up on these things and become successful and starting to threaten, those disruptive innovations starts to threaten universities, will that not then start them on the course of banning anyone producing any of them?
Well, interestingly, so I've got an extra little slide, and I mentioned this earlier. So OER13 is taking place in 2 weeks' time, and we started planning this a year ago. We knew UK OER funding was going. Last year's conference was in partnership with the more US-based Open Courseware Consortium. So we thought we'd probably be heading towards 80 people attending, but it was still worth holding the conference. I think the number's about 225-ish who are signed up for the conference in 2 weeks' time, which is right up there with the peak. And of course, they're not doing it with the JISC underwriting, on the hefty underwriting that there was previously. It's having to fully pay its way, and people are still turning up. And I think that's because, actually, whether you realised it or not, all that work that was taking place has had a real impact. It's spread out. Institutions are paying attention. Those people who used to come are finding a way to come, and it's becoming part of their job. It's gone past, we're doing this because we said in the project we're doing it. And that's moving into the transferability, sustainability. So that's a very good sign that something's going on. The other part of your question was sort of about the strange world that we can be part of, where things can be offered in restricted ways. Well, I think we just need to make sure that we do enough of the things on my list, do my list, and you can't be banned. You're being part of an open activity that's built into how universities are operating. It's really what I'm trying to do. I don't see them banning you, Bill.
But really, I think the question was that if other organisations started to use the open educational resources that existing universities are producing to undercut them, they'll say, well, why should we give you we might share them amongst ourselves, but we'll not put them out for free open use for anyone to undercut us and offer courses at, £500 or for free.
Okay, there's two parts to that, I think. So one is the organisation starting to use the open resources, which they're doing. And that was happening before the MOOC things were coming in. People like Academic Earth starting to rebadge the resources that have been released freely by universities. So that's them exploiting materials. But if they're exploiting materials that would never be exploited in other ways, which was often the case, good on them. They're showing a sort of model. The other side, I think, only comes into it once people build up a non-open relationship with providers. And that's the thing that we're on the cusp of. And that could be true, that you get things that are just provided in a sort of two-way deal. That you're releasing your material just to be used in a particular way, rather than to be released openly. And that is a risk, but there's always been material that's been released under those sort of agreements, generally more closed than the free courses that are available. As long as we keep enough of the other stuff going on, sort of that's just life in a sense. David.
Hi, David Cardahan from JISC. Will you be delivering a MOOC on open learning on the Future Learn platform?
I've got no current plans to do so for two reasons. I've got no particular plans to do a MOOC on open learning, so that's the first half. So I've got undelivered promises to other people that I will do so, which is quite different from actually doing that. So, it's called the School of Open. The School of Open launched yesterday, actually, so the School of Open Creative Commons. So do go looking there on the peer-to-peer university side. And I did say to them, oh yeah, yes, because I went along to the launch event and I said, yeah, I'll get something organised that you can have on your site. And so that's not on my good intention list. It's a secret good intention till now. The other one, which is, will it end up on FutureLearn? I've got no particular plans to do so, but I think that could be a really good route. I mean, one thing that has been shown by the collection together into identify things that people have heard of, it gives you some of the massiveness, and I think that does matter. It does matter to actually make people aware that you've got something. So the MOOC platforms have been very good for giving a message to a large number of people that here are things that could be learnt from. A lot of those people then go away again, which is fine. So I think there is something to be said for getting involved in identifiable platforms. And given my current position, I suppose FutureLearn is more likely than others, but peer-to-peer university is pretty likely as well, through School of Open.
When you talked about the old MOOC, it occurred to me that there was a link to some of the aspects of open innovation where you engage people in your product design cycle. And it seemed that something like the Olds MOOC you could use as a research tool, which would get you contact and intelligence from a very large community of people, and that therefore you could almost see that the open education aspect almost as a byproduct of some other activity you're doing. Is that something that you've got in mind or thoughts on?
Certainly we've got thoughts on, because actually it happened really. You've got the participative redesign of our tools. I'm going to single out Sheila here because as her old MOOC activity, can I say this? You allow me to? It's out there in the open, yeah. So do go tracking down what Sheila did. So she happened to do a redesign. Martin worked on it as well, did he? Or did Martin Hawksey get involved?
Tony Hurst did a bit.
Okay. So just to repeat that then, so there's a sort of visualization element to it. So the environment that we were using, CloudWorks, is all right until you can't find what you're looking for. And then search is fine, but actually visualizing connections would be perfect. And so a redesign of our environment into one that could have a better connected view was what Sheila did. But other people on the course have also done really interesting things about the way in which it can be delivered. It looks like a side effect may be a international collaboration with no finance involved between US, Australia and the UK to produce another sort of MOOC on the design of MOOCs, sort of more specifically, to which our gift is essentially the materials that underlie the design side. So, yeah, interesting side effects are certainly there of the open world. Okay, thank you, Adam.
Okay, well, huge thanks to Patrick there for a stimulating talk. So I guess there's little more to say apart from thank you for coming and sharing your insights and wisdoms. It's a very important aspect of the CETIS conference that people come prepared to talk. And I think it's been up among the best from my point of view in the kind of discussions that have occurred and the kind of positive ideas about where we're going. It certainly wasn't the negative vibe that it could well have been. So I think that's significantly contributed to by the people here. Particular thanks, as Paul mentioned at the start, to the comms team and Christina Smart for doing a lot of the donkey work around the organisation. I know there were concerns about the Wi-Fi because it's always a pain in the backside. I've had no problems, and people I've spoken to have found the Wi-Fi to be satisfaction. Lots of thumbs up I can see there. The food was refreshingly pleasant. I think last time we were here we had potatoes that were inedible and a dessert that was unidentifiable. So it's been a splendid thing. Thank you very much for coming, and we hope to see you again sometime. Thank you.